This decision may completely change how you see the confrontation between Iran and the United States. Did you think the recent large-scale aerial operation over Iran marked the beginning of this crisis? Not quite. Those flashes in the sky were not the opening move. They were the final act of a tense strategic mind game that the Kremlin had already lost before anything even began. Today, we'll uncover the unsettling reason why Russia's most advanced naval assets were forced to change course before a single American munition reached Tehran. Is the world moving toward a wider confrontation, or did Washington just carry out one of the most precise strategic maneuvers in modern history? The real turning point is unfolding behind the noise, confusion, and information chaos. And in the Gulf, the situation has only become more dangerous. To understand what really happened, you have to look at the moment Tehran realized its own missile systems could not match the pressure of two American carrier groups. Cornered and running out of options, Iran's leadership did not choose to step back. Instead, they turned to Moscow for protection. Russia's answer was built around one thing the world depends on every single day: oil. The Kremlin appears to have attempted a high-risk deception game using the global energy supply as cover, assuming the U.S. Navy would avoid interfering with what looked like an ordinary civilian convoy. But this was not a routine fleet movement. According to this scenario, Admiral Grigorovich-class frigates and Kilo-class submarines were positioned under a carefully designed concealment profile. The strategy was simple but bold. Hide Russian naval assets inside the noise and movement of massive oil tankers heading toward Iran. This is the modern version of a Trojan horse. Russian vessels were reportedly staying close to the acoustic shadow of giant 300,000-ton tankers, using a method known as acoustic masking. To underwater sensors, the sea appeared to sound like normal commercial traffic. The deep rhythm of merchant engines, the heavy vibration of supertanker propellers, and the constant movement of civilian shipping. But behind that ocean noise, something else was hiding. The tanker's enormous engines created a wall of sound, making it much harder to separate the signature of a Kilo-class submarine or the mechanical pattern of a frigate from the surrounding background. Moscow believed the cover was strong enough to slip through unnoticed. At 0200 hours, near the Strait of Hormuz, two American carrier strike groups had effectively sealed the entrance to the Gulf, turning one of the world's most important energy routes into a heavily monitored zone. Tehran, under immense pressure, had just reached out to Moscow for support. By 0330 hours, as the Russian-Iranian convoy moved through the narrowest section of the passage, Moscow believed its acoustic disguise was complete. But there was one major problem. The United States had spent decades building one of the most advanced undersea detection networks on the planet. The U.S. Navy did not simply stumble across the Russian movement, it already knew something was there before the convoy crossed the critical line. This was not chance. It was the result of the integrated undersea surveillance system. While the Kilo-class submarines stayed close to the oil tankers, a vast network of seafloor sensors was already analyzing the ocean's sound patterns in extraordinary detail. Even through the overwhelming roar of a supertanker engine, advanced U.S. Navy algorithms are designed to separate background noise from the unique mechanical signature of a Russian vessel. Every turn of a propeller, every vibration from a cooling pump, and every shift in engine rhythm leaves behind a unique acoustic fingerprint. It is a kind of digital DNA that Moscow believed remained hidden beneath the noise of civilian traffic. But American fusion algorithms do not simply listen. They separate, compare, and strip away the chaos layer by layer until the massive tanker becomes almost invisible in the data, leaving behind the smaller signatures Moscow hoped no one would notice. Then came the move that caught the Kremlin off guard. At 0400 hours, Washington ordered a strategic stand-down. The U.S. did not close the Strait of Hormuz. It did not create a confrontation at the entrance to the Gulf. Instead, American commanders made a colder and more calculated choice. They allowed the formation to continue. They did not stop the Trojan horse at the gate. They followed it deeper. Would you have stopped the Russian formation immediately, or would you have done what the U.S. Navy did and let it move farther into the trap? Drop a comment with "let through" or "block" so we can see which decision you would have made. By 0415 hours, the Russian-Iranian convoy was approaching the final route toward Bandar Abbas. Inside the bridge of the Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate, Russian commanders were already preparing their success reports. They believed they had slipped past the American detection network and beaten the most advanced maritime surveillance system in the world. But just as they prepared to separate from their civilian cover, the U.S. Navy delivered a move that changed the entire situation. This was not ordinary signal disruption. The Americans did not simply cut the Russian systems off, they gave them something far more dangerous, a false version of reality. Using a combination of GPS manipulation and signal imitation, American electronic warfare specialists began feeding the Russian formation a carefully built digital illusion. On Russian screens, everything looked normal. Their navigation systems showed them perfectly aligned with the approach to the harbor. But in reality, the US Navy was pulling their digital position almost 10 miles away from the truth, guiding hundreds of thousands of tons of steel toward a dangerous underwater reef line. The moment the crew realized something was wrong was a study in controlled panic. At 0430 hours, Russian sonar operators and LAD navigators saw the depth readings falling much faster than they should have. The numbers no longer matched the map. The route no longer matched reality. Their screens were telling one story, but the seafloor was telling another. Once the captain understood that the navigation system could not be trusted, he was forced to make the one decision he had tried to avoid for 3 days. He ordered the formation to go fully active. To confirm their true position, the Russian vessels had to switch on their radars, communication links, and targeting-related systems. In the world of naval intelligence, that was the moment the disguise collapsed. The second those signals appeared, the entire hidden profile was exposed. Moscow had just revealed its location, frequencies, movement pattern, and tactical structure to every major sensor watching the region. They believed they were moving through darkness. Instead, they had just turned on a spotlight in a room full of observers. As the Russian crew rushed to correct their systems, the gray haze ahead began to shift. Emerging through the mist was the unmistakable outline of a U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Its combat systems were active, its Aegis arrays were awake, and the message was impossible to miss. At 0445 hours, the Gulf of Oman became a stage for a very different kind of naval chess. Realizing that their tactical position has been exposed, the Russian commanders decide to test just how far Washington is willing to go. The Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate suddenly bursts into motion, its 100mm main cannon sending a rapid series of high-speed warning rounds into the water, roughly 500 yards from the American destroyer. At the same time, Moscow sends its own signal into the sky. 2 Ka-52 Alligator helicopters lift off from the deck, their thermal sensors scanning the area for any sign of an American targeting lock. The message from the Kremlin is clear: the game of shadows is over. Moscow wants Washington to believe it is ready to escalate in order to protect the image of Russian strength. But the U.S. Navy does not answer an old-style display of force with an old-style response. Instead, it brings out something far more unnerving. The Americans activate a maneuver known as multi-axis pressure. Rather than pushing forward with a billion-dollar destroyer and risking a direct exchange, the U.S. Navy releases a group of Sea Hunter unmanned surface vessels. These 132-foot autonomous ships emerge from the morning haze like a pack of silent digital hunters. Within moments, the Admiral Grigorovich finds itself surrounded by 12 low-profile black vessels moving across its bow and stern at nearly 40 knots. The Sea Hunters do not fire. They do not need to. They simply control the space around the Russian frigate, matching every turn and every adjustment with a level of precision no human crew could repeat for long. Every route is covered, every move is mirrored, every escape angle becomes narrower. Moscow is now facing the kind of strategic problem it never wanted. These vessels are unmanned, relatively inexpensive, and replaceable. If the Russian captain decides to strike one of them, he does not gain a victory. He hands Washington the perfect political and military reason to escalate the situation on its own terms. By 0515 hours, the atmosphere on the Russian bridge is intense. The crew understands that the frigate is being physically boxed in by the Sea Hunter vessels, so Moscow reaches for what it believes is its final electronic advantage, the Krasuka-4 electronic warfare system. This is one of Russia's most publicized electronic warfare platforms, built to overwhelm the spectrum and create a wide digital blackout by flooding the air with powerful radio frequency interference. The Russian commanders believe they are about to cut the American control links and turn the autonomous swarm into drifting metal on the waves. But that confidence is badly misplaced. While the Krasuka-4 pours noise into the atmosphere, the U.S. Navy's unmanned formation continues moving without hesitation. Not one vessel breaks pattern. Not one course correction fails. Because the Americans are not relying on the radio frequencies Moscow is trying to disrupt. The Sea Hunter formation is guided through a different layer of communication entirely, using free space optical links. In simple terms, the vessels are exchanging data through narrow beams of light instead of traditional radio signals. To the Russian system, it is like trying to drown out a conversation that is not happening in sound at all. Moscow expected to switch off the American network. Instead, it discovered that the network had already moved beyond the battlefield it was trying to control. Between each Sea Hunter unmanned vessel, an encrypted high-bandwidth network begins to form, built on narrow blue-green laser links that act like an unshakable digital backbone. The drones are exchanging massive amounts of targeting and navigation data every second through a channel that traditional Russian interference systems cannot reach. Trying to use the Krasika 4 against this kind of network is like trying to stop a laser beam with a paper fan. It may look dramatic, but it changes nothing. While the Russian electronic warfare team pushes its equipment to the limit and fills the spectrum with noise, the American unmanned vessels continue their precise movements in complete silence. Every turn, every adjustment, and every tactical calculation happens almost instantly, far beyond the reach of Moscow's old-school signal disruption. Now imagine being the Russian electronic warfare officer at that moment. Your most powerful system is active, the displays say everything is working, but the American drones keep moving like nothing happened. Would you trust your equipment, or would you trust the fear building in your chest? By 0545 hours, two F/A-18 Super Hornets cut through the sky and make a high-speed pass just 50 feet above the mast of the Admiral Grigorovich. The roar of their engines is overwhelming, shaking the bridge windows and sending a clear message to every sailor on board. But the real surprise comes from the one direction Moscow thought it had under control. Suddenly, the water at the center of the Russian formation begins to churn. A massive dark hull rises through the surface, pushing aside waves as it emerges from below. It is a Virginia-class attack submarine appearing just 500 feet from the Russian frigate, close enough for the crew to see the details on its sail. At that moment, the message is impossible to ignore. The Russian vessels shut down their interference systems and begin a sharp 180-degree turn back toward international waters. The fleet that was supposed to protect Tehran chooses survival over symbolism, leaving its regional partner without the shield it had been counting on. With the Russian cover gone, Iran's military network is left exposed. Washington and its allies move quickly, using a tightly coordinated operation built around shared targeting data, remote guidance, and advanced battlefield networking. B-2 Spirit stealth aircraft flying from the United States, along with F-35 Aegis operating from regional locations, enter the theater as part of a synchronized pressure campaign. Offshore, Aegis-equipped U.S. Navy ships act as the digital command layer, helping guide Allied precision systems toward deeply buried missile facilities and command centers. Under the infrared watch of advanced aircraft, Tehran's key infrastructure sites and military coordination hubs are overwhelmed in a rapid sequence of precision impacts, turning the entire situation into a defining demonstration of modern network power. The alliance that thought it could move without limits was taken apart by an American software advantage before its first response could even be approved. For Tehran, the lesson was impossible to ignore. Never ask a neighbor dealing with his own crisis to guard your front door. Iran discovered that when the U.S. Navy declares control over a maritime theater, that statement is not just a warning, it becomes the operating reality. Russia returned to Murmansk with a report claiming the mission was successful. And maybe it was, if the real mission had been to measure the full depth of a historic strategic setback. For the U.S. Navy, this was not a struggle for survival. It was one of the most effective real-world system tests of 2026. Please remember, this briefing is a high-stakes fictional simulation inspired by real-world military doctrine and emerging defense technologies. The events have been dramatized to help explain the system of systems approach in a clear and visual way. But the larger point remains very real. Technological coordination, information control, and strategic integration now define modern naval power. The future of conflict is no longer decided by who has the biggest cannon. It is decided by who controls the data, who sees first, who understands faster, and who can act before the other side even knows the board has changed. So what do you think about the Virginia-class submarine reveal that shook Russian confidence at the decisive moment? Was the Allied response too forceful, or was it the only way to show that the gray zone had finally closed? Let us know in the comments by typing "Total Control," and make sure to support the video if this breakdown kept you watching. Want to see a full deep dive into the laser communication technology that made Russia's best interference systems look outdated? Click the video on the left, and don't forget to subscribe to join the fleet so you never miss the next mission. The board is set, the sensors are watching, and we'll see you on the next deck. Go Navy!